Hello and welcome to the 52nd episode of the Powerless Podcast. In this episode, I talked to Max from Ultra Deluxe, which is a genre blending electronic cyberpunk heavy, very eclectic project with a lot of really cool elements to it, a lot of narrative and world building within the lyrical content of the releases, and very politically charged. So it fits for a lot of things on this show. Max and I talk about their start in music, what got them into heavier and alternative music, what got them into this sort of narrative building and concept band, really, when it comes to their releases for the most part, in Ultra Deluxe, and also where their political radicalization and advocacy has come from, what that's like in the live music scene, what they do with organizing, and what they suggest people should do if they want to be more involved in politics outside of electoralism, and some organizations that, if you're a little disillusioned, ones that you can check out, ones that you can join, also concepts like mutual aid, all those different things. So we dive into a lot of different topics, both through the political and music side, since Max is someone that's very politically active, as well as the kind of messaging of the band within their lyrics and within these this like sci-fi futuristic dystopian narrative structure that they've built through their music. So I really appreciate that Max came on. This was a fantastic episode. It was great to meet them and catch up with them, and it was just a really fun conversation. Definitely check out Ultra Deluxe. Check out their albums they've put out over the past couple of years. They put out an EP of 2 songs that's sort of a prequel to some of the characters that they have in some of their other albums. So check all that out. All that'll be in the notes. And again, I just really appreciate that Max came on. Before we get into the episode, just make sure you can to know that you can always contact me at the Powerless Pod on all social media. We've got a Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. There's a Facebook, but I never check it, but I get the notifications. So if you hit me up there, I will respond, as well as contact me through thepowerlesspod@gmail.com if you want to be on the show. If you enjoy what you hear and you just want to say what's up, if you have constructive criticism and want to tell me what I need to do better, I might take that to heart if it's genuine. So definitely reach out to me there. We do have a Patreon for $2.50 a month. So extremely cheap. You probably wouldn't even notice they came out of your bank account. But if you routinely listen to the show, please consider checking that out. It helps with paying for some of the things that get used to make this show what it is, and also helps me have a little bit of time to make things better. So I really appreciate you listening. Last thing I'm going to go over here is, of course, what I've been covering every single time I remember again to record intros before I get into the editing process, but is the continuing, ongoing genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and occupation of Gaza, as well as violence in the West Bank. There's also been Israeli government attacks in Lebanon and Syria. They're occupying parts of Syria as well, with the backing of U.S. dollars, U.S. bombs, and everything in between there. According to Euromed Monitor, as of March 5th, over 35,000 civilians are dead, over 14,000 children, and over 9,000 of the 35,000 civilians reported are women. 132 journalists killed, 2 million of the approximately 2.2 to 2.3 million Gazans displaced, 756 healthcare professionals killed, 279 healthcare facilities, including hospitals, ambulances, and clinics, 197 civil defense workers killed, over 3,000 detained and forcibly disappeared, and 100. I think I said this already, maybe, but 132 journalists killed as well. So absolutely horrific. I do just continue to talk about this in the intros of these episodes because I think it's important for people to see that there is something you can do very quickly and easily to handle your part in applying pressure to stop the funding of bombs and violence to the Israeli government as they continue to do these things to Palestinians, again, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, where a lot of people would point out Hamas is not even the ruling government there. It's a very aligned government to the Israeli government. A lot of Palestinians actually get very frustrated with that government for that reason, and they still experience all this violence and escalation of settler colonialism and all these different things. So make sure to go to ceasefiretoday.com, go to gazastrong.com, look at those links. Super quick, super easy. I do it every day, just on little breaks or on my way home from work, to just contact politicians, contact those in power, send emails, call. There's a host of things you can do there. You can donate to the PCRF or other aid funds for Palestinian children or Palestinian civilians to get them what they need. And so, yeah, just go to those websites. Make sure to have your voice heard to your specific congressperson, senator, MP, wherever you're at, and just see how you can help. It takes just a minute or two, and it definitely does leave an impact. We can see the Overton window shifting, albeit way too slowly due to public pressure and protests. So just keep all those things in mind as you go through your day-to-day. And it's something you can do every day if you have the time. The last thing I'm going to play at the end of this intro here, before we get to the episode with Max, is just 2 videos of Palestinian children on opposite sides of the spectrum, both showing the desperation that a child has as he talks pointedly to an Al Jazeera reporter, and also the beauty of the Palestinian children despite what's going on to them. So after you watch these videos, we'll get into the episode with Max, which is an absolutely fantastic conversation. I really appreciate their time as they came on here. So we'll be getting into the Ultra Deluxe recording right after these videos. They've humiliated us. They threw the aid in the sea. We live in Tel Al-Zatar by the sea like we're stray dogs. I just want to get a meal for my younger siblings. My younger siblings who are crying because they are starving. I swear I got nothing. I swear I got nothing. Why don't they insure for the poor families, for the widowed women, for those going to get her children food, small children? They have nothing to eat. We are starving. They can't find food either. This Palestinian teen found a way to generate electricity by rigging scraps to light his family's tent. Newton was sitting under an apple tree when an apple fell on his head, so he discovered gravity. And here we are while living in darkness and tragedy, and the rockets falling on us. And therefore I thought of creating light, and did so. Hussam and his family were displaced in Rafah, and he wanted to light the tent for his younger family members. Initially, I went to the scrap market and found these fans. So I brought them here and thought I could make a windmill that can generate electricity. The first attempt failed, and the second did generate electricity, but it was weak. In the third attempt, I bought another fan and installed it over them, and it worked. Then I connected them to wires and lit bulbs through them. With Hussam's current system, the tent receives electricity whenever there is wind. Then I bought small batteries, and then switches, and then little light bulbs. And so I started developing it further bit by bit until I was able to extend the wires through the room to the tent that we are living in, so that the tent will have light. With access to batteries, Hussam could store some electricity to provide power when there is no wind. I am very happy in general that the people of my camp are calling me the Newton of Gaza, because I hope to achieve my dream of becoming a scientist like Newton, and creating an invention that will benefit not only the people of Gaza Strip and Palestine overall, but create an invention that benefits all countries of the world. All right, I'm here for the next episode of the Powerless Podcast with Max, who is one of the members of the band Ultra Deluxe, which is at least described on your one of your social media pages as communist cyber scrams, which is right up my alley. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. You know, it's daylight saving, so we lost an hour, but I still feel rested. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was when I realized that just about 2 days ago when I knew we had this recording set up, I was like, I really hope my phone and my watch adjust quickly cuz like, you stay up late on a Saturday night,
Yeah,
11 a.m. for me, 10 a.m. I might be a little groggy still, so I made sure to get up and get my coffee and all that good stuff. So I'm happy to have you on. It's really cool to have you on because this show a lot of times, we talk to musicians, talk to journalists and activists, have had it like a full gambit. Sometimes we really talk about music. Sometimes we don't always talk about the political side of things. But your project and what you guys are all about is very much intertwined with both of those things. As I said, pretty outspoken on social media with your beliefs, as well as just like I said, your bio line having communists in there is always a big up for me. So I
awesome,
appreciate that. But I thought today what we would do is go into how the band started, all those kind of typical musician kind of conversation things that I like to do on here, but also look into where this political ideology and activism started for you and what it's like kind of having that at the forefront when you're in the music scene and stuff like that as well. Before we get into that, though, I've been asking people this to kind of get the ball rolling. I'm just curious, what have you been listening to a lot lately? What are some bands or artists or whatever you've been getting into lately? They don't have to necessarily be new, but just what's been on your recently played, I guess.
yeah. So I always listen to a lot of different genres. So as far as the punk genre is concerned, I've been really listening to Fiddlehead. Yeah, pretty popular band, and I just really like the record. I think it was from last year. The vocals are like such a really good, like they kind of meld with everything really well. And another punk band I
Mhm.
really like, you've probably seen them on political punk Twitter as well, as Trip Sun from England. That's a
Mhm.
great band. They put out one of my favorite records from last year. Um, and as for other stuff, I played with a band in Baltimore called Jade Weapon. It's a new cybergrind band. They've only played one show, and that was the show we played. And they have one EP out, but it's really good cybergrind with some more like hardcore punk elements. Like there's
Right.
definitely like riffs, and it's less like grindy, and it's more like hardcore punk. So yeah, I'm really into Jade Weapon as well.
Very cool. Yeah, I just followed them on social media, and yeah, very new band, but looks cool.
Yeah,
That
they've
looks
all
right up
been
my
in.
alley. I'll definitely have to check that.
I think everybody except the drummer has like been in some other projects. Tommy from Jade Weapon is in a band that I played with a lot called Chaz Monroe. That's another great band that I'll plug as well from Baltimore.
And I'll also throw all those in the notes for people to check out. So Max, thanks for going over that. There's a few there that I got to check out myself. That's kind of why I like doing this. It's totally, totally self-involved for me to find new bands. So I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
awesome.
um, But all right, to go from there, I guess we'll just kind of get into where kind of getting into alternative or just really getting into music started for you. What were some bands growing up that you got into? Was it kind of from anything in your household? Just what kind of brought you into getting really involved into alternative music?
Yeah, so I luckily come from a musical family, but the music my parents listened to is not alternative at all, but they were musicians. So my mom and my sister did like plays and theater growing up. I didn't. I did a little bit of theater when I was a kid. It didn't strongly resonate with me, but the musical aspect did. So my uncle is a drummer. He still is. My mom's brother. So for my 12th birthday, every time I would go to my uncle's house, I would play his drums and like go crazy. I didn't really know anything, but he was like, "Okay, Max obviously likes drums," so he got me a beginner drum set, and yeah, so I've been playing drums since I was 12. I've been singing and stuff like that earlier. As for alternative music, so I'm 30, so I kind of hit a good time with alternative music. Some formative bands like Linkin Park, Slipknot, funny enough, Saint Anger by Metallica was like on a WWE
Uh,
playlist back in like when I was watching wrestling in kindergarten, or not kindergarten, elementary school. So I got into those bands when I was like 9, 10, 11. And then by the time I was in middle school, so that was like 2004, some really important albums came out that I was really liking, like Block Party. That I remember Block Party being on MTV2, and I was like 12 or 13 when that happened, and I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. And then I got into like first wave hardcore punk, all the classics, Black Flag, Minor Threat, Bad Brains. And that stuff was really well documented in the early 2000s, going back to the 80s. So ever since then, I just delved deeper and deeper into alternative music and punk and stuff like that.
And so going from that, but before I get into you starting to play your own music a little more and doing projects and stuff, talking about Saint Anger, it's funny you say that because like I remember, it's such a polarized album to say the least, right? Like I've heard them like Metallica jokingly on stage now will like ask if people want to hear it, and there's like a resounding boo, and it's a joke, and then they move on, kind of deal. So they're even self-aware of it, but um, that was like the first record somebody bought me from Metallica was Saint Anger when I was,
Yeah.
I'm just 2 years older than you, so I was at that age where I heard it and I thought it was cool. You know what I mean? Like I genuinely thought it was awesome, and then you find out it's like the record every single one of their fans just fucking hated from the get go.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like 10 when that came out, and I did think it was cool. And I had it on CD. We bought it at, wherever you buy music, FYE or Sam Goody back in the day. And I liked it a lot. And I listened to it probably like once a year just because like I had memories of that album. I lost the CD, but it does not hold up. Like you have to be a 10. If it's like the first Metallica you ever heard, then okay, and you're 10, that record hits. But no, it doesn't hold up.
There was something I found on YouTube a couple of years back of somebody that was able, I don't know if they were able to get the stems or they were just able to,
Oh God.
through modern sonic engineering, like remix it and put in a good snare into it, and it still wouldn't be Metallica's best record, but it was genuinely like, oh, this sounding like shit made it way worse than it actually was. So I'm an apologist a little bit for that record, but I don't say that publicly very often. So but I digress from my little rant there. But so going from all that, getting into hardcore, diving more into that kind of music, having a music upbringing, what kind of got you, when did you kind of start playing music live? When did you start writing your own music, and what were some big influences for you there?
Yeah, so I'd say from 12 to like 16, I wasn't really in bands. I would like have there's like a thing so like the movie School of Rock, they adopted that into like a small business where they like would help people with lessons get in bands. And I was only really in bands like that until I was in late high school, like senior year. But basically, I played drums, and it was really hard because I was really into weird music. I wanted to be in a band that sounded like Lightning Bolt. That was like my favorite band in late high school. And I had a friend who also played bass, which was all you needed to sound like Lightning Bolt. So we eventually started a band, but it was like March of my senior year of high school. And we played like 3 shows, and those were really fun because I worked at a coffee shop that was like, it was kind of like if the Hard Rock Cafe served coffee. So like the owner wanted to like bring more music into the whole thing. And he's like, oh, Max, you play drums. Why don't you help book this show at this community center? And I just was like, okay, I guess I could try. I was going to ska shows as a kid. So I knew which shows were I had been going. And we ended up, I don't know, we were a bunch of high school kids playing music. So obviously people came. There was like maybe 50 or 100 people there. And so we played like 3 shows, and then that band just broke up when I graduated high school. It wasn't until college that I started a band that I would say like, recorded or did anything that like is still available. And I started a twinkly emo band, very much in the vein of Algernon, Cadwallader, Snowing, Glockamora. Those were a lot of bands that I was really into. Again, this is 2011, so I'm at like the peak of when that stuff was popping off.
Yeah, right,
And
right.
and I just met my friend Ryan, who we still talk to all the time, and we just hit it off about this music. He happened to play guitar, I happened to play drums, and that's all you needed to make that music. So we were in that band for all of college. We added a bassist eventually, and that band we did like 2 or 3 EPs. We did a lot of weekenders, but mostly just played like house shows in our college town, which was New Paltz. And then we did 1 tour, which went pretty well, but was exhausting because we had no idea what that really meant.
Right.
And we still get together and play. Like we'll have a show maybe like once a year, and just our friends
nice.
come out. But it was basically after college that Ultra Deluxe was like the first like post college band that I did, and that was the one that I've put the most work into for sure.
To say the least, very active. It seems like whenever I see a post from you all. There's a new show announced, or you're doing
Yeah.
so. You've released a lot of music over the last several years.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely very active, and that kind of brings us right into the band a bit here, Ultra Deluxe, which at least I was gonna double check this with you, but at least for your last album you put out, Intake Occupation, you have on Bandcamp that you did the synth, drums, vocals, lyrics, guitar for a song, bass for a song, glockenspiel, and a melodica. So
Yeah.
that's what I love about your when I first. So I actually first found your band from a little bit of uh a very polarizing
Oh,
music person saying something about your band that was totally not okay and all this, but the way you all handled it was great, to where like I instantly saw, like, you talk about communist
yeah.
ideology and organizing and having mutual aid at live shows and all that kind of stuff. So I guess in a good way, shout out to that piece of shit for getting me into your guys' band, because it was cool. But what I wanted to actually ask, and I'm gonna probably jump all over the place here,
Mhm.
but your music is very involved narratively, correct? At least that's what I'm able to find through, the descriptions you have on Bandcamp, which is kind of the most descriptive place you have for all these different things, I think. Um, when Ultra Deluxe started, was that a thought that you had from the get go? Is this how most of the releases have been, or when did that sort of more narrative world building aspect of your music come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Ultralux has been a band basically, like, long story short, Oswald kind of broke up when we all graduated. We just didn't have time. So I was like, okay, I'm living at my parents' house. I'm super broke because I just graduated college. I don't have a job yet. I was still, working as at the restaurant I worked at. So I was just going to start a solo project, and the first EP is not related to the narrative story. And
Okay.
then I was like really getting into comic books by like Jeff Lemire and stuff like that. And I was like, I think I want to make a sci-fi saga, and I really grew up listening to Coheed and Cambria,
Oh
who
yeah.
did that whole thing. So I was like, I'm gonna do that, but make it like really queer and really political. And so ever since like the second album, it's all been a sci-fi saga, and all the albums and EPs, except for like two releases, are linked to that.
So without, because I'm sure, because at least when I read through it just the other day and read through it again this morning, like I said, very involved, like full on concept narrative. Which you bring up Coheed and Cambria, that makes a lot of sense. I
Yeah,
think they went, was it they went almost every record up until just a few years ago, of all sort of being this narrative story building, and then they finally did one outside of it, I believe. I could be wrong on that even, but but can you give people, without having to dive too far into it, I guess, but I just find stuff like this fascinating as someone that's writes songs and can never also conceptualize like stories like this. It kind of like blows my mind. So kind of at least give us some bullet points, or a synopsis of what the story and what the world building elements to this narrative are, the best you can, without like losing your voice after two
yeah.
hours of talking about it or something.
Yeah, totally. So the story in nature is really political. It's set in the year 2700, so it's influenced by assholes like Elon Musk wanting to colonize Mars, and basically, so that happens in the future. Rich governments and rich politicians and business owners colonize other planets because they've used all the resources on Earth, and so they colonize this one planet, or they try to, but this planet Zevium is they fight back and they're very strong. And so most of the story takes place around the communists, anarchists, anti-fascist people on Earth allying with the planet Zevium to fight back against this government. And there are layers, like there are multiple characters. Some of them are in relationships with one another. Some of them, like one of the thing that came out last year, is like a prequel about two characters that are split up, but they used to date. And yeah, it's just basically about fighting back against colonialism, but instead of it being set, on Earth in the 21st century, it's set in space in like the 28th century. Yeah. So it's
Yeah,
just, yeah, that's what it is.
that's really really cool. I found it fascinating, just because, did you say, did the story start with Contact? Was that like when the kind of origin of it all came together?
This is when it gets really complicated, is that it's also
Okay.
non-linear. So Contact is
Oh,
the
okay.
first album. That's definitely the first release. But Contact is like the second chronological LP, but it's like the fourth chronological release. So
Okay.
Contact was the first album, and then I released a prequel called Prologue, which was an EP, and then I released the second album, which is the sequel to Prologue, the sequel to Prologue, but the prequel to Contact. And I'm like, I'm doing that on purpose just because I think that's fun. I don't know. I'm having fun with
Yeah.
it. Like
Yeah.
I the next album is 100% like the next thing in the story, but I'm just gonna jump around because if somebody somehow figures out how to read it all, I want the twists to come in like an order that they're not supposed to. Like I don't
Yeah.
expect anyone to read all the liner notes and understand, because really the only way to understand it is if you read the Bandcamp. Because I haven't figured out a way. If we have a physical release, I'll put those liner notes in there, and then all the lyrics are just dialogue. So if somebody wants to read all that, they might be able to figure out what's going on. It's just like,
Right.
yeah, I'm
I
ultimately doing
I
this
love
for
it
me
though.
and my friends. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool to make music solely. I'm not saying you do it solely for this purpose, but in this element of also realizing, people might not necessarily dive into all these different narratives, but you also write the songs great enough on their own, which is I think a tough thing to juggle for people when you do these concepts of both like um having this big narrative that a lot of people aren't necessarily going to fully grasp, right? Like especially like you said, unless you read in all the liner notes you put in Bandcamp or elsewhere. Um, but also have the songs be fleshed out to where if nobody knows any of that, it's still cool to listen to, right? Like that's such a big juggling act that I think you do really well. Because I didn't
Thank
know
you.
until I looked at the Bandcamp, because I always dive on there in case there's a release bands don't like to put up on Spotify that I can listen to ahead of time and stuff like that. You know, um, and I was pretty floored by the narratives, but the songs themselves are great and fleshed out, and you say that they're all dialogue essentially. You can kind of get that after reading everything on this, but without it, they still feel like not conventional, but songs that people could just kind of enjoy on their own, which is I think a big feat to your songwriting. That's really cool.
Thank you
Um,
so much. It means a lot. Thank you.
yeah. So I guess you brought up Coheed and Cambria and some comic books. What are some of the like specific sci-fi influences you might have, and then we can kind of get into the political aspects of your
Yeah.
music and your influence there too.
Of course. Yeah. So Jeff Lemire, he wrote a lot of stuff. He's really famous right now. He wrote Sweet Tooth, but I
Oh, okay.
really resonated not with Sweet Tooth. That's a great book, but I resonated with Ascender and Descender, which is his sci-fi book. There's a lot of references to that. Um, then I like smaller studios, POW Studios. There's another comic book artist, Ren McDonald. He's based in New York City, and I just like stumbled upon his book. I think at Forbidden Planet, which is a great comic book store in New York City, and I just really liked how it was both a little political, dystopian, I'd say, but also really whimsical and funny because he almost draws like Adventure Time. So
Yeah.
I really like Red McDonald. I do read a lot of comic books, but I also like other media of sci-fi, like video games and stuff like that. So growing up, I obviously liked weird fantasy stuff. Kingdom Hearts, one of my favorite games. Final Fantasy 12 is almost like a sci-fi game. So there's a lot of
Hmm.
references to Final Fantasy 12, Jeff Lemire, stuff like that as well.
Very cool. Well, thanks for going over that again. Really, anybody listening to this that hasn't listened to Ultra Deluxe before, also, I highly recommend reading the descriptions in the Bandcamp of each of the releases because it gives a lot of cool context to it. It's kind of um, like a backstory that you can kind of get into the narrative to understand the dialogue of some of the songs and stuff. It's really cool. Um, to go from that to go from kind of your songwriting there and your world building with your music and all that, where did being politically active or radicalized or whatever word you want to use, where did that really come from for you? And just kind of speak to your influences there, because obviously the band and yourself are very involved in those organizing and political ideology projects,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, definitely. So I've always been like to the left since I was 12, I'd say. I'm an- I'm anti-Zionist, I'm pro-Palestine, but I grew up Jewish, and so from a young age, you're taught about the Holocaust, especially in Temple, and I always saw that, and I was like, holy shit, like, what the heck? So that I've always like been interested in at least my identity with that stuff, and always interested in history, just because learning about that. And growing up, I've known I was like queer bi since I was like 12, so it was really different to be gay or queer in like 2004 in middle school. So I'd always
Mhm.
been a little bit political. And then in college, our band was a little political. We talked about a little bit about my identity and the lyrics, but it wasn't until after college. So I graduated college in 2015, that I started getting more political. All Ultra Deluxe songs are essentially political, even the early stuff. But in like 2015, 2016, I identified as like a loose democratic socialist, I'd say. And then, the Bernie campaign, I think that 2016's Bernie's first campaign was a big thing that got a lot of people involved. And then I became disillusioned with that after he lost. But it was really like I had always called myself a communist. I knew that something more drastic than just electing Bernie was what we needed to do. I had read, good amount of Marx in like post college life, but it was 2020, the lockdown, and being a teacher, a public school teacher, just seeing the inequality, that I was just like, I'm a communist. So in 2020, the lockdown, I was very privileged. I'm a teacher, so I worked remotely, and I was seeing a lot of other people like struggling so hard. And I was like, I need to do something. I'm so privileged right now that I get my full salary. I work from home as a teacher. I mean, I was doing remote work, which was difficult in a way because to keep kids engaged, but I really started doing food
Yeah.
distro, organizing with tenant organizations because people were getting evicted and they didn't have any money. So I was like, I'd always called myself a communist, but in 2020, I had all this free time. So that's when I really was like, I'm a Marxist Leninist. I am an organizer. I'm gonna do this stuff at least like once a week, if not twice a week. And that's when I really got involved, like full on.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up, and thanks for going over all that. I think I was on a very similar trajectory myself with all the things you laid out there. Also, a public school teacher, right?
Awesome.
And I would say that was one thing I haven't talked about with many other people because I don't know that people necessarily get, but just being a public educator for me personally was like a big radicalizing
Yeah.
moment of where you're seeing resources spent, where they don't go, what the direct impact is to the people that everyone seems to care about when it comes to horse race politics, which are children, right?
Hmm.
A lot of wedge issues that come up that people really get mad about that they make up in their head and are very hateful and rhetoric and stuff they say in the guise of defending children and all that. But then when it comes down to like funding food programs or funding education or giving resources or providing, um, a lot of real world tangible needs for students and their families and like working class neighborhoods and everything else. Like before I started reading stuff, like Lenin or Marx or anything like that, like it was just life and kind of stepping back and seeing all
Yeah.
that stuff, especially during the pandemic, right? That is just truly radicalizing. Did you kind of feel that way even more
Oh
so?
yeah. Yeah. So I got a big response to that. I mean, I grew up middle class, suburban, normal New Jersey suburbs, pretty comfortable, honestly. And my first teaching job in 2016 was at a charter school, which I don't support charter schools, but they were one of the places that
Yeah.
was really hiring then. And I all my teaching jobs have been either in the South Bronx or Harlem, and the school's in the South Bronx, and it was in this crappy building. Again, these are children going to the school, and there was like this exposed wire in the school, and this kid, like, how those chairs are like that hard plastic and then metal, and the kid accidentally put the metal chair on the exposed wire and got shocked. He was fine, it just shocked him, kind of like, I don't know how he felt, but I was just like, holy shit, could you imagine if that happened like in any school? And all the school buildings, I don't know if people know, I teach in New York City, a lot of the buildings are old, so a lot of the
Mhm.
water is from lead pipes, and it's fully legal to do this. Like, so the kids have to either bring water or the school has to buy a water cooler, but they cannot drink out of the water fountains, and this is legal. Like, the city is paying for kids to say, don't drink the water, it's lead pipes. Like, it's just like that would have never happened in my school, and people don't even understand that's just the building, like, not to mention the resources or like the fact that like you'd run out of paper, or like, it's just like shit that people that grew up middle class, upper middle class, rich, don't see. And that's New York City. That's supposedly like the richest city in our country. And it's just like, people don't know. And people also, a lot of kids live like that's a large percent of the population lives in big cities. And like, it's probably not only my school where kids went to school their first formative years, 18 years or 12 years of their life, not being able to drink water, or getting lead poisoning, or getting, shocked. And it's just like, people don't understand that. So that was definitely a huge radicalizing thing for me. And I got that job like 20, I think it was 23 when I got that first job.
Yeah, I think that, and then just trying to look for answers and reading things that you're not necessarily taught in high
Mhm.
school, middle school, from a lot of different curriculums and stuff like that. It's a big pipe for me, at least. It's a big pipeline for like public educators. I think they can get into this stuff. So
Mhm.
so I guess all the reactionary people are right. We're all just a bunch of communists. It's fine. But
Yeah.
no, I'm just kidding. But no, that's good. And I'm glad you kind of feel that same way. That just kind of seeing those things in what should be like a public institution is really, is a public institution, is really an indictment on the entire system that we live in. It's kind of a microcosm of a lot of different problems, from where budgets go to lobbying to everything in between, of why those things happen. um when you've taken this, put this into your music, and kind of had your activism, your ideology at the forefront along with this project, how has that been accepted overall in the music scene when it comes to the band? Do you feel that in general a lot of shows and venues and other artists are pretty welcoming of those messages and what you're kind of putting forward? How's that been, I guess, in general in the music scene for you?
Yeah. So the band has always been political, and I've always been pretty outspoken. However, I was not really active on Twitter until probably, I'd say, just generally post pandemic. And I do think a lot of people post pandemic got more political. One of my first really big, I was always involved in like, going to a little bit of protests here and there, but like with George Floyd, those protests, I was super active going to those like once a week. So I do think people became more receptive because the project's been around since 2015, but in 2020,
Right.
more people got political. And what's happening in Palestine, obviously a genocide, it's horrible, but more people are politically awakening now in the same way I, got woken up in 2016 or 2020. So I do think as the world gets more fucked up, that's horrible, but also more people get political, so more people
Mhm.
understand the need to put forth a message like this. It was harder earlier in the project, and now, like, because I'd say in 2020, like before 2020, we would always say stuff into the mic, but nothing as like evocative as like join a communist party, do food distro. Like I didn't have the bullet points like I do. And then
Yeah.
after 2020, and when we started playing shows post vaccine, I guess, um, people started resonating with it more. But I do dial it back depending on how receptive I feel like people are. And you'd be surprised the places like um, North Carolina, like the Milestone, as one of the most receptive places we've ever played to our message. The Milestone is an awesome venue that's been around, I don't know how long, decades maybe. Like on our last show, we meet a lot of people online through organizing. So we had this whole like Maoist study group came to our show, and we were, organizing with them. And that was one of the best supportive places. And then sometimes you'll play like a bar, and I love dive bars. We mostly play in New York and dive bars, but sometimes you'll see people that look like cops, and I'll be like, okay, I might not say the word communist revolution. I'll say or food distribution organize, like something that's not going to get me arrested at that point.
Yeah.
So I am discerning, but you can't be discerning on Twitter. I just say what I believe, and so that's why you get reactionaries. But they're gonna fucking have a problem with anybody saying anything, so I might as well just say it on Twitter.
So say they get mad, like those people get mad at literally like the most milk toast
Yeah,
like ideas about making life better whatsoever. So
yeah.
yeah, I've definitely been there. I've definitely been there myself. And it's good to hear though that there's venues that are kind of more accepting of that. I would say you're absolutely right that people are more outspoken in their political beliefs post pandemic for a lot of good reason. I think it was kind of like the big eye-opening moment for a lot of people that maybe were otherwise just sort of would vote and like pay attention to a primary maybe or something.
Yeah.
And I think a lot more people now are getting into the idea of politics outside of voting, which is like, I think one of the biggest hurdles when you talk to people that do realize problems, but they kind of view politics as in this vacuum of like team sports um and voting, and like I said, you're either with the good team or the bad team, and the good team's always right, and critiquing the good team means you're bad, and all all these dumb things that people get wrapped up in. You referenced it a little bit before, but was it fair to say that like with 2016 and kind of like the failure of the Bernie movement at that time to get the primary, was that where that kind of light bulb went off in your head a little bit more on your end, where it's like, okay, voting's not going to work, what else can we do? Is that kind of how it went for you?
Yeah, so 2016, let's see. I am a brand new teacher. That's my first year of teaching. And again, I'm seeing these I know people in the country have been experiencing inequality, their whole life, but I'm seeing the school thing firsthand. I'd wanted to be a teacher. I started college for learning education, but I was like, okay, what the fuck? Like, I am immediately radicalized. I was always left-ish, but I was like, okay, I'm a democratic socialist. That seems to be the thing. And then Bernie lost. I voted for him. I went to rallies, and I was like, okay, how the fuck did this guy lose? He's like the every American president sucks, but he is probably the best person that's ever run for American president, except for maybe like Eugene Debs or something. So how the
Yeah.
hell did he lose? There's something critically wrong with us if people don't realize what's going on in the schools or what's going on, with income inequality. So I was like, okay, I need to be a little bit more drastic. If this guy lost and he was running the best campaign I've ever seen, something needs to be done. So I was like, okay, I'm not just a democratic socialist. I think I'm like a socialist or a communist. And I started reading more.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I just like I got more into like understanding that like a worker led movement is more important than just electoral politics, which I still participate in. I vote in all my local elections. I think it's good to do that stuff. I'm not voting for Biden, but I do still think
Yeah.
voting. I mean, what are you going to do until it's like one of the things we should do.
Well, yeah, I've always viewed voting as like a chore I have to
Yeah,
do,
yeah,
right? And like saying I'm not gonna vote for Biden in the upcoming election, but I'll go for the direct ballot. I live in Illinois. We always have like direct ballot initiatives, or there's people down the ballot that if it's I think that's one of the big things that gets lost even in electoralism with people is like paying attention to your state politics and your local politics, because
yeah,
that's where like there's less lobbyists getting involved
yeah,
in those people's pockets. They might
yeah.
actually do the correct thing here and there.
And that's where you're going to get some of the people that might call themselves a socialist. I live in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. We have this guy, Chiase. He is, at least he calls himself a socialist, or, his socialist policies. And people on the New York Post and stuff like call him a communist and like put like red beams in his eyes, and he like shares it and he just says LMAO or whatever. So I'm
Yeah.
happily voting for this guy. Is he going to get far, or is he going to swing further center if he gets further? Maybe. But right now, I mean, he's putting up things that are helping the schools in Bed-Stuy. And I think it's
Right.
important to vote for this guy. And I've met him, when he was campaigning, he would come to the park where we would do Food Not Bombs, and he would like introduce himself. And I'm like, you don't see politicians do that. So at least right now, I still think there are politicians, especially on the local level, with integrity. And that's why I'm happy to vote for some of those folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, that's where it's like a useful tool, but it's not what's
Yeah,
going to make the
yeah,
systemic change, right? Yeah,
exactly.
100%. Um, so I guess I know that you've talked about it on online, and I've seen from things you've shared when you're trying to go to places, you'll ask if people know of any mutual aid or political organizations, all that kind of stuff. I'm just curious too, for it could be more localized ones or larger ones you've kind of organized with or worked with at shows. Um, are there a few political organizations you found throughout, both organizing and having this stuff happen at live shows that you think people that maybe are disillusioned from electoral politics could get their eyes on or get involved with, whether it's local level or more broadly at the national level?
100%. I'm going to start with some nationwide things because I'm assuming. Now, I don't know much about outside the U.S., but I'm assuming most of the people living to this live in might live in the U.S. So um,
Hmm.
that is why I'm a big fan, and not everybody agrees with this, but I'm a big fan of joining a party or political org. Not because like I think the party you join is going to be the greatest party ever, but because a party is automatically organizing. You're automatically getting involved with other people. So I think a lot of people are like, I don't see this party being the one that wins the president or wins the elections or whatever, so I'm not going to join it. It's like, it's not about that. We're not even close to that yet. You got to just link with other communists. You got to just know who the communists are and where they're at. So some orgs that I think are good is Counterpower. Um, PSL is probably the biggest national org right now. They've done a lot of the shut it down Palestine protests. So those are the two that I'd say. Counterpower and the Party for Socialism and Liberation, PSL. If you join those, you are 100% guaranteed to meet other people. There's no way that you won't. And you might meet people that live in your city that you don't know. Now, if there's those are like communist orgs. I am a Marxist Leninist. I'm further left in this group, but I do think DSA is okay to join. Like somebody was like messaging me and like, hey, like, do you have any recommendations on things I should join? I live in rural Pennsylvania. There's no communists I know. And I'm like, honestly, at that point, DSA is fine because there are Marxist Leninists in DSA. And I think DSA it was a great stepping stone for me. I was a democratic socialist, and it's just good to be organized with other communists and leftists. So if you live in a remote area of the country, DSA is great. And I don't think that it's going to solve our problems. And I don't think Bernie or AOC or those people are actually champions like of working people like they claim. But DSA is good for that.
Yeah.
And then I'm also a fan of doing like mutual aid anarchist work. So the most famous and best org of all time is Food Not Bombs. The thing about Food Not Bombs is it's wider than any of the things that I just named. It's wider than PSL. It's wider than, well, maybe not DSA, but just go on their website and they have this map where you can look up. And if you live in, you'd be surprised. Like if your city has at least 30,000 people, they probably have a Food Not Bombs chapter within a 30-minute drive. And then the map will usually have the location and time. And all you do for Food Not Bombs is just go there, maybe bring some gloves or a mask, depending on their COVID protocols, and then you just serve food, and then you immediately meet people in person that are at least leftist or left leaning.
Yeah, I think mutual aid is like the number one thing anymore because it's localized. It's with your actual community. It's not, it's not to say that there aren't mutual aid things people run through like online platforms, but it's not the same as like what mutual aid like legit, is in your local community. It's supposed to be mutually inclusive of people in need in your community. And I think that's the biggest one that you can get people to do that like even aren't overly, like you said, they might not be like dyed in the wool communists. They might not, they just want to find something to do to better their community. And like Food Not Bombs or various other organizations that you can find pretty easily now if you just search them, is a great starting point for sure. So thanks for going over that. I appreciate that. I guess going forward from that, what is your last album you put out here, if we go back to the music a little bit, was Intake Occupation, right? That came out in 2022. You had 2 singles last year that you mentioned a little bit earlier. What's coming up going forward for the band? Do you have new music coming soon? Do you have what can people kind of expect from Ultra Deluxe going forward?
Yeah, I think you said this earlier, and it's something I've thought about. But you said we are a very active band, and I try to be as active as possible. Like because I'm a teacher, I have time off all the time, and that's basically why we're able to tour so much. But yeah, we have a
Right.
new album coming out that's going to be out in the fall of this year. Yesterday, I was actually in the studio. So the reason it's taking so long is that we've got guitar, drums, bass, synth and vocals all done for it, but we're adding a lot of other elements. So yesterday we had, you probably saw on Twitter, my friend Liz from the band The Best of the Worst and Bad Bloom, she played trombone on 3 songs.
Yeah, I saw that.
My
That's
friend
awesome.
Ellie is playing French horn. She's from the band Kissy Noises. And then we've got some members of Lastima, a black metal band from Philly, doing strings and recording. So we're going to have like 3-piece strings and stuff like that. So
Wow.
that's coming out, I think, I want to say November of this year, 2024. And we are just going to play as much shows as basically whenever I have like a day off or a spring break or a summer break, we're going to try to tour and just play as much as possible.
So say it looks like even just on your Instagram, you've got March 23rd in New York City, another one in New York on the 28th. You got Providence, Philly, New York City again. Philly, you're playing like in the next couple of weeks, you're playing, 6 shows, which for a band that has people working full-time jobs is
Yeah.
quite a feat, right? Like usually people maybe do like one or two a month max,
Yeah.
right?
So the way,
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the other thing, I don't know if you noticed, a lot of people are like, "How many people are in your band?" That's the flexibility.
Yeah.
Is
I
that,
was going to ask that
yeah,
too. Yeah.
that I will answer. So there is me. I write all the electronic music, come up with the stories, the lyrics, and stuff like that. And then there's Dane, who is my best friend. They're from West Virginia and live in Pittsburgh now. They are a waitress, so they can basically request off whenever like they can like afford to, and so I'll give them the dates for longer tours or recordings since they're like the most integral member to the songwriting. They will request off, and then I just added my friend Chris on drums. I play the drums on the records, but I mostly sing live, so Chris is going to play drums, and they have a flexible job as well, with a lot of PTO. And because I'm a teacher, I have, I basically every Monday holiday I have off. So that's how we're able to do so many weekenders. But I
Yeah.
don't really, so, I don't know if you remember, oh, because you're a teacher, so we get days off all the time. And I
Mhm.
don't really, I have other hobbies, but they don't involve leaving my house. I read comic books, read regular books, so this is the only hobby I have where I like leave my house. So that's all I
Yeah.
do. And then there's some other people involved. Doug, Emily, have been, involved with the records and stuff. But if I can play the show, it's going to happen. If Dane can play the show, it's going to happen. If Dane can't, but Chris can, it's going to happen. But there's a lot of flexibility with the different members that we can play as
Yeah.
much as
It's
possible.
it's more like a collective, which works with the
Yeah. Yeah,
which works with the
exactly.
messaging of the band.
Yeah, no, it
um,
definitely is. Yeah.
well, and actually, I'm bouncing all over the place here structurally, but I meant to ask this. We were talking about the music earlier. When you sit down to write a record or write some singles, what's kind of the songwriting process for you? Do you start with the narrative first to kind of get the music to fit to match what you're going for, aesthetically? Do you start with drums and bass? Kind of what's the blueprint, if there is one, for starting an ultra deluxe song or a project?
Yeah, so the main songwriters are me and Dane, and I definitely start. I work on my laptop. I work on Ableton, and what I do, I play drums. Like that's the one instrument I know the best. I've been playing that since I was 12. And then the second best instrument I know is not really keyboard, but like programming, if you want to call it an instrument. So
Yeah.
I will program synth lines. I play. I'm okay at bass and I'm okay at guitar, but if I will just come up with one riff on bass, guitar, or synth, and then just try to be like, okay, I have one Lego piece. How do I get from like this one Lego piece to like build a house out of it? So I just kind of put it in order, and I will flesh out a song structure, not all the instruments. Sometimes I play bass and I was like, the bass should sound like this. I know what I'm going to do with drums, but I just try to build each part, usually based on one idea. The idea, though, is typically not lyrics, but it is concept. I want this song to be heavy because it's a battle scene, or I want this song to be sad because it's those two people breaking up. That's all the story really influences. But I will, and I jump around because there's so many different instruments, as you mentioned. I have many instruments, so I will play the synth and I'll be like, okay, this part next to me needs to sound like more like a punk beat, so I'll play the bass. But I basically finished writing all the albums, probably like a year and a half before the albums come out. I finished writing the song structure, 8 songs, and then I send them to Dane, who is going to flesh everything out, write all the guitar parts and all the bass parts. And I usually write the lyrics around that time. And drums is usually
Right.
last. Yeah.
So drum, and then when you record, are you programming drums, or are you doing it, in the studio with a full kit?
Yeah, no, we're doing it in the studio with a full kit. So I mentioned Doug, who's a collaborator. That's the only engineer we go to, Doug Gallo
Mhm.
in New Jersey, and we've worked with him on like the last 3 albums, and I'll work with him for a long time after this. But The only programmed drums are ones that are deliberately sounding electronic. If they're glitchy or like 808s or like stuff like that. But I know we play
Yeah.
like live because we want us to still have that mix of electronic and punk.
Yeah, that's what I really like about this project, your band. Is it kind of melds in. I think I found out again. I saw I saw what I had mentioned earlier, but also I saw some post hardcore bands that had followed you all and shared some of your releases in the past. I saw a lot of the cybergrind community doing that. And your band is like a mix of all those things in a very like eclectic way where like one song sounds more like a fuzzy garage punk song, but then some synth, flies in there and some other, cinematic elements. And then the next one will be extremely electronic and kind of fit more of that cyber guy space. So it is like a really interesting, very elaborate way of writing songs. But again, like I said earlier, you don't have to be like a musician nerd like I am to get all those things and still find the songs, good or enjoyable. They are kind of a testament to your songwriting, and then just the crazy instrumentation on top of it is an added bonus. So
Thank you.
absolutely love to hear that. I love to hear that there's going to be a new release coming out this year. I'll make sure to plug that and check it out when it comes out. I just have I guess we've gone over pretty much everything else that I wanted to go over here with you. You said playing shows as much as you can, March and April. Is there any kind of tours or anything coming up that you have planned that are kind of longer in that sense, or is it just kind of flying by the seat of your pants at this point for 2024?
No, we have a lot. They're not announced, but I'm happy to plug them here because if they, thank you for anyone that's listened to the end. I really appreciate also you, Brandon, for having me on. So we've got the Weekenders with Chris, and that's going to be our first shows with Chris on drums, and I'm really excited for those. April, there's a longer tour with Apostrophe Beats, another leftist electronic artist who's big on Twitter. And then just some localist shows in May and June. Then in the end of June and July, we're going on probably our longest tour since the vaccine came out or since the pandemic or whatever. We're doing most of the Midwest, Canada,
Oh, nice.
a little bit of the Northeast, and then we happen to be playing 2 shows in Japan, which is not announced yet, but I'm really excited
Wow.
about that. Yeah.
That's awesome. I just talked to I just released the episode with James from Blind Equation, and they're going out to Korea and Japan as well. So
Yeah.
something's going great in this sort of community because people are getting to go to places bigger bands have from more mainstream have like rarely get to go out to Japan and stuff. So that's a bucket list thing there for sure. That's awesome.
So the thing about that is my friend Jackson, he works for a video game company. He's a translator. He speaks both languages. So he lives there, and we went to college together. He plays in punk bands and stuff. So he's able to set that up for me. And then I have a friend Takumi who's from there but used to live in New York, and so he was able to set that up for me. So it's definitely a DIY thing. Like we're playing punk shows, but the punk community there is so amazing and especially so welcoming to bands from out of the country. So it's actually, I mean, it's not easy to get a show there, but if you know people, they're happy to do it. So it's something I encourage everybody to try to do.
Yeah, that's the one thing I have heard about touring in Japan is that just the community is super, super welcoming and super stoked whenever there's, a new band that's there, especially for the first time in alternative music. So that's fantastic. All right. Last 2 things I'm going to ask you here is just to plug where people can find your band, find, things that you all are about, and to just pick a song from Ultra Deluxe to play at the end of this.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me, Brandon. It's been a pleasure. We are online everywhere. Bandcamp, Spotify, Apple Music. All the stuff on Bandcamp is also pay what you want. So I just want people to hear it. Spotify, I think Tidal, anywhere you find it. And we're also on Twitter, Instagram. As you said, we're very outspoken on Twitter. If you want to hear more political rantings, go there. I'd say one of my favorite songs by ours right now is probably one of our newest ones. I'd say The Argument from our EP Quests. And thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we're going to play, you said The Argument, right?
The Argument, yeah.
We're going to play The Argument from the latest EP Quests from Ultra Deluxe. Max, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Will you leave me? answer. Well, that's fine.